third and final part of our series on rest that we've been journeying through this month. And as I've been planning this series, I've been thinking about times in my life that weren't particularly restful. No doubt the most exhausted I have ever been in my life was in the newborn stages of my children. And I like to think that those first 3 to 4 months of a newborn's life is the fourth trimester for the family. It just continues on. Both times, for both my boys, I have 2 kids, it was a hot mess, and I did not have it all together. When I had Ronan, my firstborn, I can remember clearly the first time I went out of my house for a non-doctor's appointment outing. It was probably the first time that I put on pants that weren't sweatpants, and I was going to meet another mom friend who had a baby that was 2 days younger than Ronan. They actually met each other in the hospital because we were at the same hospital. It was very cute, so we were setting up another play date. And our plan was to go to the Carlisle Mall, because I lived in Carlisle at the time, we both did, and to walk with our babies. And I assumed that that meant walking with a stroller, and you'll see very shortly that that was not the full case. And so I hadn't taken him anywhere by myself before. My husband had been with me on all of the doctor's appointments together, and I had also never used our stroller before because I didn't need a stroller for any of the doctor's appointments, right? So I practiced with Richie numerous times before I left, because sometimes strollers can be tricky, you parents know that, on getting the stroller down, putting the car seat in the stroller. I also had to practice getting the car seat out of the car, because I had never done that on my own either. My husband always did that while I was healing and everything. So I arrived at the Carlisle Mall late, of course, and it took me a couple minutes to figure out how to unlock the stroller, because when I had practiced, Richie had already unlocked it for me. That was a little part that I didn't know. So when I finally figured out how to unlock it and set it up, I took a little while to get Ronan out of the car and get the car seat into the stroller. It took me a few times to get it just right to click in. But I also didn't mention to you that my son was born on January 12th. So it was around this time of the year when the weather was very cold. And as soon as Ronan came out of the car, he started screaming from the cold weather. So I made it to the mall entrance, and my friend was standing there with a smile on her face, very calm, cool, and collected, without a stroller, because she decided to wear her child. So not only did she get there before me with her newborn that was even a little younger than Ronan, she was able to get her out of her car seat and into a contraption that to me is much more complicated than a stroller. And she looked so very rested, smiling there as her newborn baby was just sleeping very calmly. And I pushed my stroller over the doorway into the mall, and in that exact moment, the wheel on the stroller decides to pop off, just adding to the chaos of the situation. I should have mentioned that my friend was the professional second child parent. This wasn't her first rodeo. And so when I was pregnant with Reese, then I thought, I am going to look like her. I'm going to be so put together. And that was not the case. I was a hot mess for both of my children. When was the last time that you felt like a hot mess? Could be every day, right? Any big change in our lives, whether we are parents and have gone through that or not, can leave us feeling tired and off kilter. Like the newborn stage, when everything in your life is changing, you are left feeling exhausted, so much so that normal everyday activities can seem difficult, right? But those kinds of seasons aren't meant to last forever, thank goodness. We were created for work, but also for rest. Many of us can remember the last time we were a hot mess, but I wonder if you can remember the last time you truly rested. Right in the very beginning of our Bible, Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and in the very first chapter, God models for us what this natural ebb and flow is supposed to look like. So in that first chapter, Genesis 1, we hear the first of two different creation stories. And the author describes the story of creation. And in 31 verses, we read about all that God created in 6 days. And the second chapter opens in this way. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. God is the main character of creation. In the first pages of the Bible, maybe even just the first page, depending on the font that you read from, God rested. God stopped working. Depending on the translation, it may say that God finished, or others will say ceased or completed God's work. Many of us point to this scripture as the reasoning behind practicing a Sabbath day, like today is for many Christians. And we'll talk about other scriptures that support that as well, because that is very true. But have you ever thought about God not really needing to rest? God is omnipotent. God doesn't need rest, so why did God choose to rest? I think there's a sacredness that comes with ceasing your work, with stopping, with completing. God provides for us this model of a sacredness of rest. And it's not just a biological need. This is the rhythm of creation. And so if God can rest, then so can you, so can we, right? For God, it's not a reward. It's about being in relationship with all of creation. And we see this throughout the Gospels. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus rested. Jesus was both fully human and fully God. And so that fully human part needed rest. Several times, Jesus went away to pray. Early in the morning or in the middle of the day after a long period of healing or teaching. Sometimes he would pray through the night. One time in the Gospel of Mark, there's a lot of healings going on and a lot of people coming and going from him that Jesus didn't have a chance to eat. So he took his disciples and he said, let's go. Let's leave this place, get away from all the people, and go and rest. But I also wonder, if any of you have wondered like me, what God did on that seventh day in our creation story. Maybe God took time to be in relationship with creation, to play, to admire the beauty that God had made. How many of you have ever built something with Legos, or maybe built something like furniture, putting something together, a kit? Many of us have, right? Maybe you're a painter and you've created something else with Play-Doh or mold or other things. My son Ronan loves to play with Legos. He loves putting different Lego kits together, and he'll also create things on his own. I'm biased. I think that he is brilliant for his age, but he loves creating something himself with Lego blocks. But he also has a little brother that's 2 years old who loves to play with him, and the way that Reese plays with him is often by knocking down what he's built with his Legos or tearing it apart, and Ronan gets so frustrated. And we remind him, we say, Ronan, they're Legos. You can put them back together. You can build something new, but that's not good enough for him. That doesn't matter to him because he wants to preserve the work that he's created. He wants to be able to admire his work. You can't do that if you're still working. So many, many years after creation, we see rest considered in a unique way. The Israelites, we hear their story, the story of God's chosen people. They're freed from slavery in Egypt, led by Moses through the desert for 40 years until they get to the promised land. And so there's a part where Moses is preparing them for coming into this land. The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, this is from Leviticus, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land that I am giving you, the land shall observe a Sabbath for the Lord. For 6 years you shall sow your field And for 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather in their yield. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your unpruned vine. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. You may eat what the land yields during its Sabbath, you and your male and female slaves, your hired and your bound laborers who live with you, for your livestock also, and the wild animals in your land. All its yield shall be for food. So that's the first part. And here's the second part. You shall count off 7 weeks or years of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives 49 years. Then you shall have the trumpet sound loud, and on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement, you shall have the trumpet sounded throughout all your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year, and you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. You shall return every one of you to your property, and every one of you to your family. That 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. You shall not sow or reap the aftergrowth or harvest the unpruned vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat only what the field itself produces. In this year of jubilee, you shall return every one of you to your property. When you make a sale to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor, you shall not cheat one another. When you buy from your neighbor, you shall pay only the number of years since the jubilee. The seller shall charge you only for the remaining crop years. If the years are more, you shall increase the price, and if the years are fewer, you shall diminish the price. For it is a certain number of harvests that are being sold to you. You shall not cheat one another, but you shall fear your God, for I am the Lord your God. You shall observe my statutes and faithfully keep my ordinances, so that you may live on the land securely. The land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and live on it securely. I wonder if there has ever been a time in your life when someone interrupted your time of rest. After college, before I was married, there was about 6 or 7 years where I lived on my own, and I lived in all different kinds of places, but one of those places was probably my favorite, a little studio apartment in the basement of my landlord's house. Now, I had great landlords. They were a middle-aged couple who had 2 daughters that were both out of the house, but the youngest daughter was in college, which meant that she came home on breaks. And I remember one 4th of July, the middle of the summer, I went out to watch the fireworks with friends, but I came home soon after that because I was going to be working very early the next morning and would have to leave at 6 a.m. or some really early time, so I wanted to rest, right? Get to bed early. And as soon as I laid down to rest, music started playing above me in the house. And it got louder, and voices started talking and singing to the music. Footsteps were moving everywhere. And I was very frustrated at what was happening, right? I thought, my landlords are so quiet. This is not them at all. And so I called the phone, right? I called their home phone. I heard it ring, even in the midst of the music, and no one answered it. I think at one point it might have been unplugged because I called a few times. And I didn't want to go up there and be the uncool person to shut a party down, right? To threaten to tell their parents or anything. So I eventually fell asleep, but the college student was having a party with her friends, right? And it was not pleasant when someone isn't mindful of our need for rest. There was actually a neighbor that told on her, and so the landlady said to me, "How did you sleep on the night of July 4th?" Leviticus reminds us that everyone is worthy of rest and that there is enough rest that is available for all. There is this amazing pattern that we see in all that I read of sowing and pruning and harvest and then Sabbath. And it's not just for us, for humans, it's for all of creation. So first, it describes God's Sabbath for the land. For 6 years, God instructs them to sow the field and then produce the harvest. But in the 7th year, every 7 years, rest. everything. Eat what the land has already given you. God's plan was for there to be enough for all. And then there's this year of Jubilee. That's the second part, which is amazing. Every time I read this, I still am so amazed that God's plan is for balance to be restored back to the ecosystem every 50 years. That there's this renewed sense of equity, right? This means that you don't overplant or you don't overharvest so that some have more than others. In this year of Jubilee, there was resting and rebuilding relationships, remembering their community of faith and finding wholeness in their homecoming together. It has been a really big week for our country. I know that we worship in a place where we are all over the political spectrum here. So some of us experienced this week very different than others did. But one thing that disappointed me about this week was what I witnessed on social media. And we've all experienced it, whether we're on social media or not. We remember last year, leading up to November, right? There were arguments and ugliness from so many on all sides. But then I felt like after the election, there was this little break, maybe a rest from it all, because everything was decided, right? We were just waiting. But then it returned this week with a vengeance. People were so quick to attack one another, and I'm already so exhausted. The very things that should unite us as a community often divide us because of our individualism. And this is not about the left or the right. All of us are so prone, I believe, as Americans, really, to focus only on our needs that we forget the needs of other people. And this is contrary to the vision that God has laid out for us here. It's a vision of mutual care, of shared abundance, of collective well-being. God's plan is never centered on our own self-interest. It's always centered on looking out and caring for one another. And perhaps, I really don't think we'll all ever find true rest until our community around us is able to find rest as well, just through our kindness to one another. There are so many ways that we can do that. I think part of that is really limiting our time on social media and probably other forms of media as well. Staying informed is important, but face-to-face conversation is what's real important. I was talking on Friday to the organizer of the event yesterday that happened here, the Super Bowl tasting, and he is so passionate about having these events every year. Last year it was ice cream tasting, which I'd rather taste ice cream than soup, in my opinion. But he has all these ideas for like chicken wing tasting and all these things. And he said it's because our world is so isolated right now, right? We don't do things together anymore like we used to. And so when we have these events, he said, I love to see people coming together and eating and laughing and talking with one another. It's so simple, yet something that is so, that we need so much. And that in itself is a form of rest that is very healing for the soul. I think true rest comes when we create balance in our life as well. I follow a woman on YouTube who goes by the name Minimal Mom. She's a minimalist. I don't think I'll ever be as much of a minimalist as her, but she talks a lot about finding freedom through decluttering homes. And so in one of her videos, she talks about this 4-burner theory that I really clung onto. So if you picture your life as a stovetop with 4 different burners or parts. So you have your work and your family and your friends and then your health. Now, our stoves don't usually look like the one on the screen because it's hard for us to keep all of the burners going at the same time, right? When we cook, I can only keep 2 going at a time. Maybe you can keep more, but that's all that I can handle. It's not realistic to have them all 4 running at the same time, and it's like that in our life, right? We can't have all 4 of those burners, work, family, friends, health, running at the same time, but sometimes we try to juggle it all. We try to juggle work, even if it's not paid work, taking care of our daily needs, trying to squeeze in quality time with our family, balancing our life with friends, trying to be good friends to others, and then, getting exercise and staying healthy, because that's important too, right? We're being told that all the time in January. Now, ideally, there would be a time in there to carve out rest, and that God would be a part of that in the middle there. Ideally, that would be what it is like, but so often we don't take time to turn those burners off for that to happen. Sometimes we try so hard to stay on top and control of everything that's cooking in each area of our life, that our relationship with God and the rest that we so desperately need just gets pushed off to the side. And in doing so, I think that it becomes that much harder to control the burners in the first place. Even God rested. The one who doesn't need rest at all rested. We weren't created to work 7 days a week. It's not the natural rhythm of the world. So I wonder, what do you need to release in your life in order to find rest? Or maybe you're feeling really rested right now. My parents are retired. They feel so rested than I've ever seen them in their life. Maybe you are in a season of rest right now, but you need to release something so that others who are not rested might find rest. So others who are burnt out might have some help to carry that weight. So in your bulletins, I told you earlier, there's 2 slips of paper. The other paper in there, I invite you to take out. It's a little piece. It's actually water-soluble paper. I invite you to write on that paper your answer to that question I just asked you. What do you need to release in your life in order to find rest? There's pens in the back if you need them, and there's extra bulletins if you didn't get one too. I hope there's some extras back there. To write down on that paper, what do you need to release in your life to find rest? And that might be many things, right? Maybe it's selfishness or pride. Maybe it's a constant need to work or to be successful. Maybe you need to release relationships that are harmful or a habit that you've picked up that's destructive. What is keeping you, or maybe if you are well rested out there, what is keeping others from finding rest? So I invite you to write that on that paper. I'm going to say a little prayer while the band comes up. But during the final song, you're invited to come forward then. There are 2 bowls of water here, and there's one on the back table too, so you can spread out. And I invite you to bring that paper that is water-soluble to the bowl. There's a little stir in case you need to stir it to dissolve a little more quickly. But I invite you, as you come forward, to put it in the water and to watch it dissolve. And as you watch it dissolve, to allow God to help you release it. That's the hard part, right? Releasing it, finding ways in your life to release yourself of the things that are holding you back from finding rest. I invite you to pray with me.